How does professional color grading look like? I've been asking myself this question for a while now, so for this video I dove deep into the matter of color grading and here's what I found. I specifically want to structure this video into two parts. First, how to set up a professional color grading pipeline, and second, how to create a look that serves the narrative of your story and actually fits the style of your project. We start with the footage, more specifically with the color space of our footage. We generally record in a limited color space, and even if we could record all the colors there are, we would still not be able to display them. This color space is used to represent all the colors we are able to see with our eyes. It's called CIE 1931. And this is the sRGB color space in which most internet content is displayed nowadays. That's why we want our final video to be in sRGB or in Rec. 709, which is the same color gamut as sRGB with the different gamma transfer curve. That's also why your video might look a little bit flat or washed out after exporting. Since Rec. 709 was created in 1990, now there are newer ones like Rec. 2020 and ACES. But here we have to differentiate between scene-referred color space and display-referred color space. Rec. 2020 is a display-referred color space, basically like Rec. 709, but much bigger and with a lot more colors. ACES is a dynamic scene-referred color space, meaning we work in ACES, but we don't display the image in ACES. So we might be working in a scene-referred color space, but we still need to export into a display-referred color space. For example, Rec. 709, which makes the most sense because we're gonna upload this video on YouTube, so it's displayed in Rec. 709, like we discussed earlier. If you're doing client work with Netflix and other streaming services, you might need to export into Rec. 2020. Now, for recording, the most popular types of color spaces are linear color spaces, logarithmic color spaces, which are called log for logarithmic, and raw, which technically is not a color space, but it's still in here. Not every camera will support recording in all of these, and every manufacturer has their own versions of these, like Blackmagic RAW, Canon C-Log, or Sony S-Log. These are just slight variations of these color spaces specifically fitted to the sensors of these manufacturers. A linear color space will say the highlights really bright and the shadows really dark, which is perfect if you want to watch the footage right away, and it's also very convenient as the file sizes are really small. Usually the footage gets saved with 8-bit color depth. Now that's good if you want to do these things, but it's really bad if you want to work with the footage later, because you can't recover any highlights from the bright parts of your image or any detail in the dark parts of the image. That's why we use log. Log saves the image with the logarithmic gamma curve. In a more broad sense, that means we push the highlights down and the shadows up. And we usually save the color data with a color depth of 10-bit. That said, shooting in log results in the loss of almost all contrast and color in the image, but the image isn't intended to be viewed directly from the camera. Instead, it's designed to save as much information as possible in the shadows in the highlights so that we can work with that later. Log file sizes still are relatively small, and even though the footage doesn't look really pleasing, we are still able to display the footage on our PC without any special treatment to the files. Unlike the next one we're going to talk about, which is RAW. RAW actually saves every bit of information that the camera sensor records. This obviously results in huge files, and also we're not able to play these files as they're not video files but rather just data files. So to be able to display RAW files, we first need to convert them into video files. Obviously, as a result of RAW saving as much information as possible, that gives us a lot of advantages in the post-production. For example, we're able to change the white balance and the ISO, which when recording log or Rec. 709 are baked into the image. In addition to that, RAW usually offers 10 or even 12-bit color depth. With this information, we can set up a color pipeline. When heading into Davinci, you can set up a project to your liking, and then you can head to project settings and color management. Here you can select ACES CCT and then the latest ACES version. Now there's a box that says ACES Input Transform. This is the step in the ACES pipeline where your footage, depending on which color space it's in, gets transformed into the ACES color space. So that your footage gets transformed correctly, you need to select the color space of your footage. If you have footage with multiple color spaces, like I do, we are not going to select anything here, but we're going to manually set the ACES input transform later. Now, the output transform is a step in our pipeline where the footage gets transformed back into a color space of your liking. For us, obviously, we want to select Rec. 709 because we're gonna upload this on YouTube, which gets displayed in Rec. 709. The sweet part about ACES is that you can always come back later and change the output transform without needing to do additional adjustments to your image. So now that we have set up our color management, we can import our clips and assign the correct import transform. To do that, just select the clips and click on ACES input transform, and here you can assign the correct color space. Now all set up, the color workflow is usually split into 3 parts: the primary correction, the secondary adjustment, and the final creative look. These 3 parts often go hand in hand, and depending on your preferences, can be approached in many different ways. After you finish cutting and editing, we're gonna start with the primary correction. Now switch to the color window. Here you will find a lot of stuff that can be really overwhelming, but I will explain everything when we get into it. Starting with the node view. With your clip selected, you will already have a node here. If not, you can create a new serial node by clicking Alt+S or Option+S on the Mac. Each node gets fed the image information from the previous node with the changes of the previous node applied. That means the source image information gets fed from here and fed into the first node. Now, let's assume we darken the image here and feed the image into the next node. Then the next node is working with the darker source image. The green connection feeds color information and the blue connection feeds mask information. Now create 3 serial nodes for primary correction. We can also name them normalization, balance, and matching, as to not get confused. Selecting the first node, we will start with the brightness and contrast of the image, as that is what the human eye is most sensitive to. To help us with that, we can look at the waveform diagram. Vertical axes represent the brightness of each RGB color signal from pure black to pure white, and the horizontal axis represents the image as columns from left to right. This is useful to check that the image is neither clipping at the top nor the bottom. Besides lens flares and specular highlights, the brightest point of your image should be below the top and the darkest point slightly above the bottom. That way you don't burn out any details or create artifacts in the highlights and shadows. Skin tones should sit between 50 and 75%. You can find different types of waveform diagrams, for example luminance waveform, which just shows the effective brightness and contrast. Either way, the waveform is essential and shouldn't be overlooked. To normalize, we will use the primary wheels. Here we have lift, gamma, gain, and offset. We can look at a curve to understand how each of these affects the image. When we look at the curve, the horizontal axis represents the darkest parts to the brightest parts of the image, and the vertical axis represents how dark or bright these parts are. So if we use the lift wheel, we essentially drag the darkest point of the image up or down, thereby affecting the whole image's brightness, but mostly the dark parts. Same thing goes for gain, just the other way around, mainly affecting the bright parts and barely the darks. The gamma will create a curve, mostly affecting the midtones, and the offset will equally raise or lower the brightness of the whole image. Now we can refine the details by adding contrast, and you can balance where the contrast is dominant by dragging this up, so the contrast is mainly in the brighter areas of the image, and dragging it down so the contrast is mainly in the darker parts of the image. Moving on, we adjust the white balance and tint. If you have parts in the image that should be pure white or gray, like white wall, or if you have used a color checker, you can use the color picker to set the balance by clicking on that part of the image. If not, this doesn't quite work, so you can just adjust it manually by dragging the temperature to the left or to the right to make the image warmer or colder, and the tint to move it more towards pink or green. The intention here is to get a neutral look without any tint. Don't worry if the whole process takes a while. It's a lot of trying and going back and forth. There are a lot of different ways to approach normalizing the image, and you can utilize a lot of different tools. But this is the most basic concept, and most of the time you will be fine doing these steps I explained. Next, I will balance the colors of the image to make sure we don't run into any problems later when creating using the qualifier. So selecting the balance node, again we will look at the waveform. For that specifically the red, green and blue channels, whether they are aligned. When a channel is elevated, that means the image will have a slight tint towards that color. To correct that, we can head to the cursor, select the channel that is elevated and start with the highlights, dragging the white point so that the graph aligns there. Proceed to do that with the midtones and the shadows as well to create a balanced image. The next step would be matching the shots. This can be a tedious process, especially if you use different cameras. But because we use ACES, all the shots should already be converted into this color space correctly. Still, you might need to adjust the brightness, the contrast and white balance and so on if you use different settings or you change location. You can do that the same way you already normalized and balanced the image. To compare, you can grab a still by right-clicking on the preview window and selecting grab a still. Now you can open the gallery, and if you click here, you can select a way of displaying it. Moving on, before we get into the secondary adjustments and the creative look, I want to talk about color theory a bit. To determine what you're going to do to the image, you first have to understand what effect certain colors have on the viewer, how to use them to create certain feelings, and which color combinations work and which don't. When grading in Davinci, Premiere Pro, or any other creative application, most of the time you're gonna use HSL or HSB. This doesn't refer to the color space, rather the way we describe or address it using different applications. Hue describes where the color is on the visual spectrum. Saturation, how strong or how weak the color is represented. And brightness, or often described as luminance or value, how dark or bright that color is displayed. With these three, we can build any color we want. And by manipulating the value of these three, we can manipulate the color of our image. Now, a good guideline for choosing the colors in your image is to think, what do you want the viewer to feel? For example, you want them to feel the happiness of a person in the video, or you want them to feel safe. Or the opposite, you want them to feel uncomfortable. There are two factors that play into how the color of your image affects the viewer. First, the color itself, and second, how you combine that color with other colors. Looking at the color itself, it often reminds you of things and conveys emotion related to these things. Of course, the specific effect a color has on the viewer comes down to the individual, as everyone has different experiences. But often, the general effect of colors are similar. For example, blue. If you think of blue, you probably first think about the sky and the ocean, and if you think of an emotion, it's often calming or safe and stable. With red, it's often anger or love. But as I said, it's important to know your audience. Depending on which group of people you're targeting with the video, they might be connecting different emotions or things with these colors, depending on culture, age, and so on. Keeping that in mind, think of what do you want the viewer to feel, and then what colors might the viewer connect with this emotion? Now, an image usually consists of more than just one color, and randomly combining colors can look really bad really fast. So if you want an overall pleasing image, you can use color harmony rules to decide which colors you choose complementary to your base color. Choosing a color harmony rule can be motivated by the narrative of your story. For example, you have a story of a woman choosing between two men, but unsure which one to choose. She's innocent and honest, so we can choose a bright, desaturated color, like beige for her. You will also have shots with the two men, one rational and providing a safe environment, and the other more guided by passion and emotion. So we can design shots with the first man with a monochromatic blue color scheme and shots with the second one in a monochromatic red color scheme. Both really saturated as they represent really strong character traits. Monochromatic being the same hue in the whole image with different brightness and saturation values. Now you will have shots with both men, rivals perhaps, interacting in a scene, both represented by their color. Their characters, two sides of the same coin, which can be represented in a complementary color scheme. Complementary being two hues opposite to each other on the color wheel. Of course, this is really simplified, but bear with me. Then you will have shots with just her following her journey, whether she will choose one or two. Her state of mind represented by her environment, filled with red and blue. If she leans more towards one or the other, you can have that color dominating the environment. Here you would have a split complementary color scheme. Split complementary being her as a main color and two accent colors split symmetrically to that color on the color wheel. When she eventually decides, her state of mind needs to be clear. And at that point, she has developed a very strong character as well, represented by her color becoming more and more saturated. Meanwhile, the red and blue in her environment become more and more desaturated, as the two men take less and less meaning of her life, and she starts following her own path. There are also other popular color harmony rules like analogous being three colors next to each other on the color wheel with one dominant color. Square being four colors split 90 degrees on the color wheel. Double split complementary being one dominant color and two on each side of the axis of that color split symmetrically, and so on. Also, you don't have to use a color harmony rule. It's merely a guide to help you find a pleasing composition. But in case you do choose to use one, there are many different websites to help you with that. For example, Adobe Color. Here you can select the color harmony rule you want to use and select the colors you would like to use. Then you will get suggestions and you can play around with the colors to find a composition that you like. Now, to apply a theme, you can isolate certain areas or colors of the image to just affect them. Again, there are dozens of ways to do this, but I'm going to show you the basic ones, starting with area selection. First, create a new node and name it, so we know what it's for. Then click on the mask tab. Here you can select the type of mask, or you can even draw it yourself. By masking certain parts of the image, the node will only affect these areas. So if you apply color changes, only these areas will be affected. You can make the mask more seamless by adding a soft edge, or you can even change if the node affects the inner or the outer area of the mask by clicking here. Masks are especially useful in static shots, but you can also simply track the position of a mask by switching to the tracker tab and track in any direction by clicking here. Next, we have the qualifier, but before we use that, let's create a new node and add a parallel mixer node. The parallel mixer node enables us to apply multiple overlapping changes to the image we have now. You can add more nodes to the parallel mixer node by clicking Alt+P or Option+P on the Mac. Moving on, we can select one of them and click on the qualifier. Here, just click on a color on the image you want to select and tick the highlight icon on the viewport to see what you are affecting. You can adjust the color range you are affecting by using the sliders at the bottom. Now, all the color changes you apply to this node will only affect this color range. You can also use the curves to make adjustments to only certain areas of the image. And in most cases, you will also combine these tools to get a more refined result. Finally, with all your color changes applied, you can apply effects to your image like glow or film grain. Just add an additional node and drag them on there. Now you have brought your image to life by applying changes to your image that actually fit the theme of your video. Please leave a like and subscribe if you'd like to see more. I've linked another one of my videos up here, and I hope I'll see you in the next one. Peace.